The beautiful Mary Higginbotham went missing from Indiana on June 6, 1978. At first, her boyfriend, Tim Willoughby, was considered a person of interest, but that was only until an informant came forward with a dreadful tale of double murder. Mary's body would be found on June 5, 1979. She had been stuffed into a barrel and buried in a creek, but Tim's body would never be found. Disturbingly, the two men who were prime suspects in this murder were initially arrested, but they were released. What happened? How could there be no justice in this case after all of these years? What happened to Mary Higginbotham and her boyfriend Tim? This case is brought to you by... Behind every true crime story is a shattered life. I have raised awareness for over 300 cases and have worked directly with the family members on many of them. This book highlights 40 case files. Some of them are famous, many of them are obscure. There's missing persons cases, unsolved homicides, serial killers, and more. Check out Shattered today to learn more. So tonight we're talking about Mary Higginbotham. Now this is a case that we're going to blend into next week. We're going to talk about something as well that has to do with an Indiana cold case. Now there has been a lot of people try to tie the two cases together, and there is absolutely nothing that actually ties these two cases together. Unfortunately, the case we're talking about next week is the case of the burger chef. I guess is Burger Chef. I always want to say Burger Chief. The Burger Chef, it was kind of a precursor to Burger King. The Burger Chef murders, they came in and kidnapped the teenagers that were working there and killed them and left them in the woods. And that was a very famous case in the area, and the media's kind of went crazy with that. But unfortunately, this case does not have any ties to it, and so we're going to talk about that next week, and we'll talk about that case separate from this case, because unfortunately you have a documentary and you have some podcasts and a little bit of YouTubers and things like that have just followed along with the narrative that these cases could be tied together. And unfortunately, when you do that, yes, you're still mentioning the victim's name, so that does have a little bit of it does help a little bit just to keep their name out there, but it really hurts the case. And so I'm here to tell you that we are not going to connect the two cases. These are two separate cases, and we'll tell you why. And so we wanted to make a good, clean video for Mary Higginbotham and her boyfriend, Timothy Willoughby, tonight. And next week, we'll talk about the other case that people try to tie it to. But we are of the mind, after all three of us have done some research on this, and I did a 2-hour interview call this afternoon, and we're all of the mind that this is not tied to that case, and we're going to explain why. But in this situation, we feel like it does a disservice to the family when you try to tie them to other famous cases. And you kind of want to do that because the famous case gets more attention. But Mary Ann deserves just as much attention as that case. And so this is what we're going to do tonight. We're going to talk about her, and we're going to talk about her boyfriend, and we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, because if you look into it, it looks like a wonderful, sweet young couple that were disappeared and killed off, and then you're going to find out that there was a lot of trouble brewing behind the scenes. And we're going to find out that Mary Ann ended up getting killed because her boyfriend was in trouble with the law. And that's a brutal truth, and not necessarily blaming anybody, but it's really important that you really know who you're with, because they can get in trouble with people and get in trouble in the underworld, and you can get mixed up in it. And so this beautiful 22-year-old girl got mixed up in the wrong thing, and she paid dearly for it. And now we have a family that's left behind that still doesn't have answers. And so tonight, Mary Ann Higginbotham. She's the one we're talking about, and I have a picture here that I was going to share. This kind of gives you, now this is not a real good picture of him, but I'm going to do a quick screen share, and I'm going to let you guys see the newspaper article. I believe that's the best picture I got here. I'm going to show you a picture. Cricket, can you let me know when you see that?
I can see it.
Okay. Now, we're talking about this sweet little lady. Her name is Miss Higginbotham. And then this is Willoughby. He looks like he might be stoned on something at the time. I don't know if he was a drug user. I do believe he probably dabbled in it like everyone else at the time. But I do know that Willoughby was part of a car theft ring. Now, in this time, there was drugs running rampant through this area. A little bit later, you'll find out next week when we start talking about that case, there was also someone leaving random bombs in bags around. And then you'll find out that there was teenagers murdered at the burger joint. So there was a lot going on in this area at the time. Unfortunately, you might look at this and think, okay, well, what does this have to do with this case? Well, you'll find out that there was a lot going on. And so there was a car theft ring in this area. Now, Timothy Willoughby, him and two other men were stealing cars, running them through the body shop that was owned by his associate's father, and they were chopping them up, and then whatever they couldn't get rid of, they would take off and take it to a random location and burn it. Now, this had been going on for quite a while. They had been successful many times, but this time Timothy had gotten caught. Timmy had gotten sloppy. Now, they had hauled the car off and they weren't paying attention. They had taken it apart in Tim's garage. Now, Tim and Mary Ann lived together, and they had taken this hot car apart in Tim's garage. Now, this is obviously not a well-oiled machine, because if you've watched any kind of crime show that real high-end car thieves can take a car apart down to its lug nuts and get rid of every piece of it. Well, this is not the kind of organization that these three men ran. They still had pieces of it that they couldn't get rid of, so they would take it out into different places and burn it. They would torch it. Well, they went to do that. They had kept this car a little longer than they had wanted to, so they were in a panic to get rid of it. They put it on the trailer and went to haul it off. They didn't pay attention, and it had fallen off the trailer, or the wheel was messed up, something. Nobody paid attention, but it left huge drag marks all the way from Tim's garage out to where they dumped it and torched it. So it was just kind of one of those random, probably should have been in my seriously stupid criminals stories. They left drag marks from the car from the dump site to the guy's garage. Well, to make it worse, Tim had done something that he wasn't supposed to do on top of stealing a car. They normally torched everything that was left. Well, he decided he was going to keep the seats and a few things out of the car and sell them on the side without his associate's knowledge. He was going to make a little bit extra cash on his own. Well, he decides to do that, and he stores those extra pieces in his attic. Well, the problem is they had left these skid marks down the road. So the police follow that. And if they had gotten to the house, though, and couldn't find any evidence, he may have been able to get off on it. But unfortunately, he didn't. There was still pieces of that car stored in his attic. So he got in trouble with the law. Now, at the beginning, he didn't rat out his two buddies. He just took it. Well, he was getting ready to go to court on the 11th, June 11th. He was ready to go to court, and he was going to testify. Well, what people didn't realize until later when this informant came up, he had already told his two cohorts that you're either going to pay me a lump sum of money so I can disappear, or I'm going to tell on you guys. And they had been planning, you'll find out from the informant, you'll find out that they were planning to kill him for a month. So this is where that undertow of chaos has placed these two young people. Now, for one, here's my thought. If you're going to rat on somebody, it's kind of stupid to tell them in advance. But he had specifically told them that if they didn't pay him off, he was gonna tell on them because he wasn't gonna take this rap on his own. Well, the police didn't know this for a little while. So we're operating for the first 4 years after Mary Higginbotham disappears. They're operating on the fact that Tim is gone. They didn't find anything, and maybe he killed her. So the way it starts out is June 6th, 1978. The police get a phone call. It's not a phone call from the parents because the parents are out of town. They get a phone call from the restaurant where Marianne works. Marianne hadn't come in or called in for 3 days in a row, and that was absolutely against her nature. She if she didn't show up for work, she called. And so nobody had heard from her in 3 days, and they were getting nervous. So they called the police. The police took the report. The police go by their house. They go by the house. They do not go in the house. They bang on the door. No one answers. They wait outside for a little while, and then they leave. They do not go into the house, okay? If they had gone into the house, they would have seen a crime scene, but they did not go into the house, okay? So I contend there was one, unless they have probable cause, they can't just bust down the door. I get that, but it would have been nice if they had maybe peeked in some windows or done something to kind of get some idea that this is not right. So they take the missing persons report, and they find out that the boyfriend's gone too. So for the first year, everybody in town says these two lovebirds just ran off to California because they had done that before. Okay, so everybody in town thinks they just skipped town. They went off and eloped because that was a big thing, and so they don't even pay much attention to it until a year later, almost to the day, on June 5th, 1979, a young man finds a barrel that's washed up on a creek bank. Okay, on a gravel bar in a creek bank. Now, I believe it was called White Lick Creek, I believe is what they said. This 55-gallon barrel had been welded shut, and he was curious, so he got a hammer and things and busted it open, and out falls a skull. So he calls the police, they take it in, they go through the processes, they find out that it's Marianne Higginbotham. So at that point in time, they had already put an arrest warrant out for Tim because he didn't show up for his court date and didn't show up for other things that he was in trouble for. But now he has an arrest warrant out because he's his number one suspect in Marianne's murder, because they never find Tim's body. Okay, so for the next 3 years beyond that, until this informant shows up, he's under suspicion. Okay, now he's under suspicion of murdering Marianne and getting away with it because nobody's seen him, nobody's heard from him. Now, in the middle of this time frame, that's when you'll find out that this other big case happens, not too far away, and some eyewitness that was high on 3 different things, and changed his story 2 or 3 times, and you'll find out that he was good buddies with one of the cohorts that took Timothy out, allegedly. He says that he believed he saw Timothy in the getaway car for that crime. He changed his story 3 times. It was dark. He was across the street, and he readily admits he was high on 3 different drugs he'd mixed together. It was marijuana and heroin, cocaine, and something else. I can't remember what the third thing was. So he's definitely not a viable witness, and I dismissed it right away, honestly, because we've talked about before how bad eyewitness testimony really is. Also, you find out that there's things called leading the witness and things like that kind of make you think you remember something you didn't remember. But then the fact that he's high on 3 things and he's changed his story 17 times. And my thought on it is you go back to the practical application of things. If he had killed Marianne and he had gotten away with it, why would he come back to his hometown and his home stomping grounds in the same area and try to do another job and kill some people? You know, if he'd gotten away scot-free and nobody had found him in all these months, why would he come back and do another job? So to me, that witness immediately sounded not credible whatsoever. What do you think, Cricket? Did that guy sound credible to you at all?
No, not at all.
Tammy?
No, not when it's after dark, and it just didn't make sense anyway.
Right. And so we find out later, and after I talked to this person for 2 hours today, she's like, well, if you look back, you'll find out that he was a cohort of one of the two men that this informant blames for the murder. And so you'll find out that he was a friend of one of these guys, and of course he's going to try to finger somebody else and finger Timothy and finger, and so what upsets me is in these documentaries and things, they don't ever come out and say that this guy's full of it. They do say that he's changed his story a couple times, and they do say that he readily admits that he's high on three things. I can't remember what the third thing he was high on.
Speed. Was speed.
Speed,
Yeah.
cocaine, and marijuana.
Yeah, marijuana.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm sitting here going, he's already admitted he's on three things. And then he says that he saw for sure, he knows he saw this for sure. And I'm like, heck, on all that crap, you could be hallucinating. Who knows?
Yeah, why would they even question him while he's saying that he's on these three drugs? I would not question
he
him.
admits that he's on the other side of the road. It's like 12:30 in the morning, and they didn't have the real nice street lights like they have now. Basically it was lit up by some old neon lights, and that's about it. And Billy Green says he's living like Motley Crue. Absolutely. And I'm not trying to, be on a high horse or anything about what he was on. I'm saying as a witness, he don't have a clear head, and he's readily admitted that he's on three things. He's not even just on one, he's on three things. He's across the road, it's dark, he don't know what he saw. Besides the fact, we've talked about this before, eyewitness testimony is like 70, I can't remember if it's 72 or 78% wrong. So I'm sitting here going, you don't know what you saw. I know if I seen something across the road after dark, not taking anything, I couldn't tell you what it was. So and the fact that he was so adamant about it, I'm like, no.
Yeah, we had, when I was patrolling coming home, it turned out to be a dog, but we thought it was a human being laying down on the ground. It was at nighttime. Just for eyewitness, we thought this was a person.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't,
and it's a dog.
Yeah. Big one.
When it's dark outside, you don't see well, but your subconscious still tries to, you see something and your brain still tries to recognize what you've seen by comparing it to things that so it could be something out there you've never seen before, but your brain's going to give you a label. You know what I mean? And so I'm sitting here going, it could have been, who knows? It could have been, an elk or something. You don't know. If you don't know what an elk looks like, if you don't know so the thing with it is he was not credible from the very beginning. So I took his information with a grain of salt. And I wish they hadn't give so much time in that documentary to that story, because I felt like it did a disservice to Marianne's family and Timothy's family by doing that. And so of course they would just happy to get some kind of publicity. But to me, I felt it really kind of broke my heart, because I'm like, after all of these years, this mother still doesn't have one good clean video about her daughter, in the family of Timothy. They don't have one clean video just about them. And so that's what we're trying to do tonight. They need a video just about them. And so I'm going to, it's just a tad bit early, but before I jump into my next, what exactly the informant said, I'm going to run this short bit of information for you. Tammy, do you have something to add before I go to this?
I can't think of anything.
Okay. All right. We'll be right back, guys.
Darkness settled around him as he locked the law office door. Like a lamb led to the slaughter, he knew he was next. He'd stood against the Dixie Mafia's machine in Phoenix City, and he would pay dearly for it. 28 times blood had been shed without justice. Law enforcement, judges, and local politicians were all connected to the criminal organization, and they had sucked the life out of the community for decades. Who was he to think he could escape their grasp? The people tried to make a stand and voted him into office, but Albert Patterson would never take the position. As he walked to his car, a gunman emerged from the shadows. Patterson felt a cold steel barrel shoved against his teeth. The projectile tore through his skull, but the gunman's fury wasn't finished. 2 more bullets ripped through his body as he fell to the ground. The sacrifice bled out on the street as the gunman hurried away. The faint streetlight glinted off the badge on his belt.
Thank you for taking a moment to watch that. That is the ad to the audiobook for this book that I'm giving away tonight, The Dawn of the Dixie Mafia. Every time you check out that or anything on my Amazon page, that helps me make more videos for these families. So thank you for staying with us through that little bit of a break. Now, we are talking about an informant that come through on this case 4 years in 1982. So it's 4 years after Mary Higginbotham went missing. Now, Timothy has never been found to this day. Marianne was found a year later in a barrel. Now, she was wrapped up in some linens. I believe there was at one place said that it looked like she was wrapped up in some kind of blanket or bedclothes. Another place said that it looked like a sleeping bag, but we also know that she was kind of wrapped up in some carpet. She was bound by the foot and the hands and the chest, and she was shot in the back of the head. Now, we do know that at one point they were able to take those carpet pieces, and it did look like the pictures of the homeowner's carpet. But of course, there's no way of knowing for sure because there's no, this was after the whole rental house had been renovated. So this is where you're going to find out that this is terribly disturbing. The police didn't go into the house that day when they were doing a well check on Marianne. If they had, they would have found a house that was disheveled. They would have seen a place that there was blood on different places. You would have found out that all the couch cushions were missing. You would find out, I read one place that the whole cushion was missing, and then another place where it was just the fabric off the cushion was missing. So I have to put it out there that way because I'm not sure which one is correct. But pieces of the couch were missing. You'll also find out that there was pieces of the carpet and the flooring that was missing. And people began to think that the carpet that was found around the body was actually the pieces of carpet that were missing from that house. Now, the homeowner of that house needed to rent out the house again. But when he came and seen the house in such a state, he took good pictures of everything. He went to the police to report it because at this point in time, this was before Marianne's body was found and she was a missing person. So he goes and reports it and does his due diligence, and he is dismissed. They're of age. They must have ran off and eloped. They went back to California, whatever the case. Nobody did anything with those photos, which turned out to be the crime scene photos taken by the homeowner. So he has to file his insurance claim to be able to afford to renovate his home. And he takes those pictures and uses them in his insurance claim. So he files them with the insurance company, they pay, and he goes and renovates that house and rents it out again. And so he had taken these things to the police and they ignored him. So he went on with life and he went ahead and rented out the house again. On one hand, it would have been nice if he hadn't have gone ahead and rented out the house again and renovated it and all that. But on the other hand, what was he supposed to do? He wasn't, a multimillionaire. He made his income by renting out the house, so I don't necessarily blame the guy. He did everything he could, and the police assured him that no, this is just they ran off. So I don't blame the homeowner whatsoever. He tried to do his due diligence, but he had to get that rental house back up and running. So in doing so, though, the crime scene was destroyed, and so there are still pictures of the crime scene. I'm not sure if police still have them, because you'll find out later on that everything, including the files, were destroyed as well. So 4 years after all of this chaos, an informant comes forward. Now, during this time, Timothy is actually the police's number one suspect in the disappearance of his girlfriend. They think he's on the lam. This informant actually happens to be the ex-wife of one of the two men she's going to tattle on. Now, we're talking about Ronald. I'm going to have to look at the names, so I pronounce them. Ronald Tomasic, I think's how you say it, and James Kellum. Now, she was James's wife, and our ex-wife, she comes forward and says that she knows exactly what happened to Marianne and Tim. Tim is not on the run. He did not kill his wife. In fact, her ex-husband killed them both on the same day, on June 6th, 1978, that he killed them. And the reason being is Ron and James were the two men that were running the stolen car scam. Now, they would steal the cars, and I can't remember if it's Ronald or James, that his dad had a mechanic shop, and so he would go over there and take some things apart, and he would go to Tim's house in the garage and take some things apart. And so these two men are the ones that Tim had threatened to tell on, because he's like, I'm not taking the rap for this. They had stolen several cars over a period of time and gotten away with it. So he was afraid the whole car theft ring would land on his shoulders, and he wasn't ready to do any kind of hard time for it. So he verbalized, if you pay me some money, we will disappear. If you don't pay me some money, I'm going to court on June 11th, and I will tell them the whole truth. And then those two guys were looking at some significant jail time. So you'll find out that this informant, the ex-wife, she comes forward and gives a very, very explicit, detailed account of exactly what happens. She said on the night of June 6th, 1978, by then it's early morning, dawn's about to break by the time they come back. She's furious. She's wondering, if he's out cheating on her or whatever. She's up all night waiting on him. He comes home and he is in quite a state. She says that they had come in and they were covered in some dark colored something. She wasn't sure. She assumed that it was oil from a car. But she'd find out that it's blood, and he ends up telling her reluctantly, shut up, just help me clean up. And he eventually tells her that this is blood she's cleaning out of these clothes, and she needs to get them clean. And it doesn't matter what she takes, she's got to get them clean, because they had just killed a couple people. And so finally she supposedly works out this whole story that Timothy had been threatening James and Ron, and saying that he was going to snitch on them. And so they had, for the last month, they had been planning on trying to figure out how to handle this problem. Now, she says she was completely shocked by this, and that she was forced to clean the blood out of these men's clothes. She says that they came forward to her and said that that they went by the house and Marianne was home alone, and she let them in because she knew of them as friends of her husband. So she let them in to wait on her husband to get home. Instead of waiting there patiently till he got home, they grabbed her and shot her in the back of the head. Then they stuffed her in a barrel, took that barrel to his dad's shop and welded it closed. And they put it in the water. They put it up, I believe it was 22 miles north of where it actually would end up later. Then they said that Tim came home, and they met him outside and got him in their vehicle and drove him off under the pretense of going somewhere, and killed him about a mile from the house, stuffed him in a barrel, and buried him at the same place. Then she said what happened is a year later when that barrel came loose and they found Mary Ann, that they freaked out. They went and got him out of the barrel. They said that they took him to the body shop. They dismembered what was left of him, and then they put him in the vehicle with them, and they drove around several counties and just threw pieces of him out the window to get rid of him so nobody would ever find him. And this is all the information she has. And then she gives even more details that we won't go into. But then to make it even more substantial, she brings forward several rings that her husband gave her and said that they were Mary Ann's. Now, she said she was forced to clean them, so they probably wouldn't find any DNA on them, but she said she did believe they were Mary Ann's. Well, they ended up taking those to Mrs. Higginbotham, the mother, and she did verify, yes, they are Mary Ann's rings. So here we are. We have finally, after 4 years, we have a very strong motive revealed. We've got the whole plan revealed. We've got several details that the police had already known, but that they hadn't made public. And then they have some physical evidence with these rings. Now, they go out and they arrest Ron and James. For some reason, though, the prosecutor turns around and lets them go. The prosecutor gives the excuse, well, these men demanded a speedy trial, and let them go. Now, everybody has a right to a speedy trial, but that doesn't always happen, and you don't usually get off for that. So I contend that there probably needs to be someone look at the prosecutor, because I have seen so many cases that go to court and they win in court on less evidence. So you've got several circumstantial things that build up, but then you also got a lot of details that she gave the police that weren't public knowledge. So she verified her own story through those details, and then she gave physical evidence to the police. So, Cricket, what do you think about them letting them go after all of that? After all this time, within 5 years, the bad guys are arrested and let go, and now all of these years later, we're basically in the same position with this case. What do you think, Cricket? I'm going to get a drink of my coffee.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And the information that she was given, they're not details that you could give unless you absolutely knew something, saw something. It was when you describe things, like when you describe a blanket, or you describe, that's a description. And I'm sorry, she had to have seen it to say it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There were several details, and there's some things that we can't say on camera about this whole situation, but she had a lot of details that she should not have had if she had not had some kind of knowledge of the situation. And so to me, she claimed that she didn't come forward because she was scared of her ex-husband and she had to get away from him first. Whatever her excuse is, it was 4 years before she came forward, but her information was still checkable. So, I mean, several things they were still able to check out 4 years later. And so she said that now some of the family and friends, they think some of her details are off. Like, they don't think, Tammy, they put the barrels in a gravel pit. Was it 22 miles from where she ended up?
That's what you had told me earlier, and then I think
it's 20 miles. And then where she ended up was 12 miles from her house.
Right.
So
it was
people, people would think, well, how could a little creek move a barrel like that? What happened that year? They had a freak snowstorm, and they got like 26 inches of snow, like within a week. It was insane amount of snow that they weren't normally getting. And so that created some massive flood waters and some runoff. And so that's when that barrel was jarred loose and that barrel floated down, and it ended up 12 miles from her house. And so that's when she was found. Now, some of the family thinks that it would have been hard for them to go back where that location of that gravel pit was and get it. So that's still up in air and in question, because in reality, we don't have a way of checking that. They did get some police out there to go dive and dig in that gravel pit and all that stuff, and they there isn't a barrel there, but there wasn't really a good way to prove that there was ever a barrel there, so we don't know for sure. But the way she detailed all of the dismemberment and how they dispose, I mean, I tried to be discreet in the way I explained it, but if you read the papers and you listen to her, she's got some pretty gruesome details that I didn't include, that really kind of line up with things. And so we have to wonder if whether he was in a barrel at the same location or he was somewhere else. I contend that information there, that rings true, whether he was in a barrel there with her or he was somewhere else. I do believe they dug him up wherever they put him and dismembered him and got rid of him, because that would also explain why he was never found. So that rings true to me. What do you think, girls?
Well, yeah. And it'd be easier to, I mean, I don't know how deep this water was, but I don't feel that these two men would have the intelligence or equipment that would be needed to remove a barrel that's submerged in water, the weight of that, and also I don't see how they could find the exact spot, because it's water, the move, you know what I mean? Like she was even distant from where.
I don't necessarily think it's impossible.
Oh, it's not impossible,
because
but
I
it's
always
hard.
I could think of different ways to do it, but my thought on it is whether he was ever in a barrel or ever in the gravel pit or ever in the water.
He was definitely moved from wherever he was.
There's something about the way she talks about the way they panicked, they got him back wherever they had stashed him, and then the way they discarded him. There was so many gruesome details in there that I'm like, it just rings true, that part of it. Yeah. And so that's kind of where I'm at. I'm like, it honestly, to me, it's disturbing, drastically disturbing.
Yeah.
But sometimes in the details, they actually verify some of the information that you have. And so when they do that, it kind of makes that story ring true, versus if they make up some fantastical story that none of it rings true and the details don't line up with the evidence you have, then you can kind of disregard it. But in this situation, everything she said with regards to how they got rid of this poor man, all of that rang true to me. Wherever they had him stashed and brought back, to me, is irrelevant, but the way they got rid of him is disturbing. And then it also kind of goes to show you one of the reasons why they never have found him. They've never been able to dig him up. If he was still in the barrel in the water somewhere, if they would have either found him when they dug in that gravel pit, or they would have found him downstream eventually. Because one barrel got jarred loose, why not the other? Eventually that he would have come up eventually, and they never found him. So to me, I can see the argument with why they think he was never in the water. To me, it's irrelevant. I believe that they freaked out when she was found and they moved him wherever they had him. I believe that. So
What what amazes me is just how ruthless these two men allegedly were, because
right.
when you hear all the details, like how they went about getting the barrels to cover their tracks, how they knew to weld them shut, how they knew to drill the holes in the barrel,
Mm-hmm.
how they, transported the bodies. And then I assumed they took all the things out of the house, probably the blood splatter, the carpeting, that's probably why they took all the things out of the house, maybe. I mean, that's a lot of evil intelligence, it seems
Well, and
like.
that's a lot of planning, because usually if this was a, an emotional, high strung, in the moment type of kill, they wouldn't have covered their tracks so much. You know what I mean? Because usually if it's a heat of the moment kill, there's a panic, oh my gosh, and then try to hurry up and clean up. But in that hurry, they make more mess and they leave more evidence behind. And this, you could tell, was planned out. They had it ready. They had. And see, the thing about the holes in the barrel, that was something that wasn't publicly known. They did not put that in the paper. They did not release the fact. They said that she was in a barrel and the lid was welded on it. They never said publicly that there was holes punched in the bottom so the water would come in. They never said that anywhere publicly. And this is one of those little bitty details that the informant told them about, so they knew that this informant knew something legitimate, because that was one of those little things that wasn't publicly announced, And
Yeah, and I
so
believe
if you don't think about it, if you didn't put holes in that thing, if you didn't put holes in it, it wouldn't sink. It would
yeah.
float,
And didn't
you know.
they even kind of help the barrel go down, make sure
Oh,
that
I'm
it
sure
went
they
down?
did. I'm sure they did.
And
I,
you
I
didn't
mean,
have Google back then to look stuff up to say, okay, how do I sink a barrel? They had to come
right.
up with
They
something
had
else.
they had to
Yeah,
figure this out on their own. Yeah.
yeah. Because
Yeah,
in one
because I
of
mean,
the
you
articles I
can't Google
saw,
that crap back in
right?
1978.
In one of the articles, I know it might have been her saying it, that one was a little worried that the other one wouldn't come up from the water because they had to make sure that barrel really sunk.
Right. Right. And see, to me, it all of that, those little details like that is what shows she knows what she's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But that also shows the pre-planning,
Yes.
and it shows that, I'm trying to be careful what we say here, but it shows me that they knew what they were going to do, and they had talked about it for a while. Okay, so this whole concept of this being a last minute thing because they was afraid he was going to snitch on them, they knew he was going to snitch on them,
Right.
and they were making a plan. And because it, to me, and Cricket, I think you was the one I was talking to, because I talked to both of you during the day and I forget which one said what, but I think you was the one that said one major red flag that you figured the police should have seen right away was that he goes missing 3 days before he's supposed to go to court and snitch on these people.
Yes, and the fact that he's doing these weekends in prison. Why would you go take off? Because when they catch you, now you're going to be doing some serious prison time. So that
Exactly.
doesn't make sense right
No.
there.
Well, and to
That was a
explain
red flag.
that, to explain the weekend thing, he had gotten in trouble for the car theft thing, and up until this point, he could do 40 days in prison, or he could do 10 weekends. So he would check in and be in jail for the weekend, and then he'd check out on Mondays. And that was kind of a precursor to their work release program that they have in Indiana, is what I read. But basically, he had checked in for all of his weekends until the last part of May. And then he didn't show up for his check-in. And so he had already worked out some different things on the things he was in trouble with before. So he should have been able to, there was no real reason for him to just run off, because he had already worked out
Right.
some of those things. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah,
So, this is something that I find disturbing. I did an interview today, just a casual phone conversation for a couple hours. And I found it disturbing that when they had these two men in jail, they released them and their excuse was they needed a speedy trial. Everybody has a right to a speedy trial. It just doesn't always happen. The prosecutor was the one that said that, and then the prosecutor went to leave. Hang on. I choked on my coffee. When the prosecutor went to leave and go to become a judge, I think is what they said. When the prosecutor left that office, they destroyed the whole file for Mary Higginbotham. Have you ever heard of a legitimate reason for a prosecutor to destroy a file? Cricket?
Nope, unless they're trying to hide something. And now, this should have been checked out so much earlier. It baffles me. It really does. With all those red flags right in the front, major red flags as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely.
And
What
the
about
prosecutor should have pressed more.
Absolutely. What'd you say, Tammy?
Well, I know you haven't got to this part yet, but what about the fact that they'd confessed to two other people as well?
Well, see, that's one thing. They're supposedly confessed to their attorneys, but their attorney can't officially say anything for attorney-client privilege is the excuse they gave, which, if everyone already knows, what does attorney-client privilege got to do with anything? Everybody already knows, and you've already told other people, so you kind of destroyed that yourself. But this is something that usually police and prosecutors and all that, they don't get rid of case files. Even old case files, even solved case files. They usually keep a hold of them, even if they're just for training purposes years later. They don't usually throw out case files and destroy case files, especially, I have never heard of anyone throwing out a case file that's unsolved. Never, ever have I heard that. No, I've heard of shoddy practices in their storage. That case that we covered about Jennifer Harris in Texas. They had it in a little storage pod out behind the police station, and it got rained on and got wet, and half of it got destroyed that way. That was just apathy and ignorance, I'd say. It wasn't intentional. But this is a prosecutor who flat out destroyed everything. And then when this friend and family member and advocate tries to go back to the new prosecutor, they say they've been there for years and they'd never even heard of Mary's name. And they're like, you have some information on this? She goes, I have the whole case file because I paid to have copies of this case file. So this family friend and advocate actually had to give the new crowd of officers and investigators, they had to give them the case file because their case file was destroyed.
And back then, didn't they keep everything in a basement? Mm-hmm. So somebody took those deliberately. Somebody didn't want them found.
Somebody took them and destroyed them
yes,
on purpose. I mean, this case is 46 years old. And if somebody, this person that I talked to on the phone, if it hadn't been for her, there would be no case. And I'm giving kudos to her.
Yeah, she's kept it going and hasn't given up.
In reality, if it wasn't for her, this whole new round of police department, this whole new round of prosecutors and their cold case investigators, they hadn't even heard Mary's name. And they like, do you have some information on this? And she's like, I have all the information. And she told me, she's like, well, that's because I had to go down, this was back before you could order things on the internet. She said she went and she paid a penny a page to have them photocopied for her. And so if she hadn't done that and hadn't maintained all the information and all the newspaper articles and all the information all these years, the police wouldn't have anything to go on today. So kudos to her. She knows who I'm talking about. I don't know if she wants her name added to this or not, but the family knows who she is, and she knows who she is, and kudos to you as an advocate. You're the bomb. I
Yeah,
appreciate you. Everything you do, you're amazing.
She is amazing.
She is. And then she has spent her lifetime being an advocate because of this case. And so here we are. It's 46 years later. You've got, they did try to submit what little bit of DNA they could find in 2016. Unfortunately, here it is 8 years later. There's still no information out there on the DNA. There's no information out there, no new information out there to go on. But to me, I don't think you need new information. I think you have the information. You had all the information you needed within the first 5 years of this case, and you squandered it and threw it out the window. But that information is still good. And if these people are still alive, I think you still have a case. What do you think, Tammy? Do you think they still have a case? I mean, there's more information in this case than a lot of cases we've covered just since you've come aboard.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of a scary thought that these two individuals, as far as we know, are still out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And so they're still out there, and they've just gone on with their lives. They've probably got wives and children and grandchildren, and people don't even know who the heck they are or what the heck they've done.
Right.
And that's what's scary. There's nothing saying they can't do it now. I mean, they'll be in their 70s, but it doesn't take much to show up and
right, and they can always get somebody else.
And so, how many people have they hurt? How many laws have they broken? What have they done in the last 46 years? How much chaos have they caused? How much problems have they caused? Have they killed anybody else? I mean, you dismember somebody and spread them across several counties.
Yeah,
you can't tell me they haven't done something since then. You know what I mean? That is a level.
And I question
above.
too. What did they do before then? Because you don't just chop.
You don't just get to that. Yeah, I agree. You don't just get to that.
So it was like, was one of them a butcher? Were they hunters? Because you know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, they definitely had a different level about them, and that's what's scary about it. But to me, this case, I still believe they already have it solved. They have the answers they need. They just never followed through on it. And now 46 years later, I'm not so sure there's anything left to follow through on. I couldn't find obituaries on those two people, but that doesn't mean we didn't look hard enough on it. We were busy researching other things. So, but in this situation, you've got 46 years. 41 years ago, they had all the answers they needed. And so for 41 years, this family has been left in limbo, and there's nothing being done. So today I just wanted to make a video for the family, nice and clean, not trying to tie the case to something it's not involved in. Just nice and clean. You've got Mary Higginbotham, 22, killed in her home, stuffed in a barrel, found a year later after the floods come through. You've got her boyfriend, who was supposedly killed at the same time or the same day, who was disposed of. We're not sure how for sure. And he's never been found. We've got two people that have been fingered as the suspects. They were arrested and let go, and that's the end of the case. That's all there is to say. And did I miss anything, girls?
No. And they never looked into anyone else.
No. And I think it's because they knew they had the answers they needed.
Yeah,
it was done. They had the answers they needed. This case is solved. There's just no justice in it.
Exactly.
Nobody paid for it, but the case, I believe, is solved. You know exactly who did it. You know exactly why, and we're pretty certain how. Yes. And so, to me, it's just a matter of it was never followed through on. There was all kinds of mistakes from the beginning. Those mistakes were carried on. And continued, and now 46 years later, I don't know how you're going to get justice on this case. There's a few things that could probably be done, but in reality, if they wait much longer, everybody in the case is going to be dead.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we're at. So today's episode is brought to you by Bones Coffee Company. You can forget about boring coffee when you drink Bones Coffee. Not only do they offer a variety of flavors such as strawberry cheesecake and maple bacon, they are a family-owned company that puts great detail not only in their coffee, but in the artwork that comes on each individual bag. Bones Coffee has a coffee club that will deliver your favorite coffee to your door every month. If that wasn't enough, they also have some amazing swag to offer. Check out Bones Coffee Company today. I'll have my affiliate links in the show notes for you.